This rifle's busted. PO2, Alvarez growled, slamming the MK-13 down on the shooting bench at Camp Pendleton. The sharp clatter of metal echoed, halting the entire SEAL Team 7. From the far end of the target line, Sarah Martinez, a 3-year-old nursing student working part-time at the range, blurted out, "It's not the rifle. You're pulling the trigger to the left because you're anticipating the recoil." Silence fell instantly. A civilian had just publicly corrected a SEAL. Alvarez let out a mocking laugh. But Lieutenant Hanley, the team's commander, coolly handed the rifle to Sarah. "Want to back up your words?" 500 yards. One tight group. The unit held its breath. Would this young woman silence the SEALs? Or bring trouble on herself? Camp Pendleton, range 117 amperes. The morning still cloaked in a thin mist. The sound of Pacific waves crashed against distant cliffs, blending with the familiar clink of brass casings hitting the concrete. Sarah Martinez crouched, replacing paper targets, her movements as precise as a machine after 8 months on the job. She knew every stake, every steel frame, even the small dents left by bullets over time. At this place there were unspoken rules. Those in uniform shot. Those in orange vests like Sarah stayed quiet. Civilians didn't offer opinions, didn't interfere, just did their tasks. Set up targets, log shots, clean up. That was the silent agreement between soldiers and outsiders. And Sarah, who saw this as a job to pay for nursing school, had learned to follow it. But following didn't mean not watching. Over those 8 months, she'd become a silent collector. Every shot, every stance, every mistake imprinted in her mind. She knew the difference between a 10-ring hit and a stray shot wasn't the rifle, it was the shooter. She knew a breath could turn a perfect shot into a miss, that a rushed trigger pull scattered rounds like sand in the wind. Those lessons didn't come from books. They came from her father, Gunnery Sergeant Miguel Martinez, a former USMC sniper who once taught at this very range before an injury forced him out. He'd told her, "A good shooter doesn't need many rounds. He just needs one perfect shot." On weekend mornings, 2-year-old Sarah would lie in the grass, listening to her father correct every breath, every heartbeat. He was strict, never offering praise. But Sarah knew his silence was approval. Now, on range 117 amperes, Sarah was applying those observations to others. SEAL Team 7. They rolled up in black SUVs, stepping out with the confidence of men forged in iron discipline. Sarah admired them but knew in their eyes she was just a cleanup girl, nothing worth noticing. She accepted that. She even found comfort in being invisible. But this morning, PO2 Alvarez disrupted the routine. The young, overeager recruit kept missing at 500 yards. Each time the targets were checked, his shot groups spread like a shotgun blast. Sarah watched, spotting the basic errors: off-center weight, misplaced elbows, rushed breathing, jerky trigger pulls. Mistakes her father would have roared at in his students. She bit her lip, trying to stay silent. But when Alvarez snapped, slamming the rifle down with a thud and muttering, "This MAC-13's got issues," something in her snapped too. That excuse was too familiar. Her father had drilled into her. Never blame the weapon. If you miss, fix yourself first. The unspoken rule to stay quiet wavered. In that moment, Sarah forgot she was just a civilian. Her voice rang out clear and sharp. "The rifle's fine. You're pulling the trigger to the left because you're anticipating the recoil." Instantly, the air tightened. The distant waves seemed to hush. A civilian had just corrected a SEAL mid-training. Sarah felt her chest constrict as the team turned to stare. Their gazes were heavy as metal, a mix of surprise and irritation. In that moment, she knew she'd crossed a line. And one question flashed in her mind. Had she just signed her own pink slip? Or opened a door to something entirely new? Dear audience, take a moment to relax, maybe grab a glass of water, and keep listening to this gripping story. Drop a 1-inch the comments if you're hooked, and don't forget to subscribe. The silence after Sarah's words stretched like a sight line that never found its mark. On the range, the sea breeze whistled through ear protection and helmets, carrying the chill of early morning. Every eye locked onto her, the weight of their focus pressing the air into something dense. To the SEALs, she'd stepped beyond her bounds, into territory she was never meant to touch. Sarah felt her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't meant to challenge anyone. The words had slipped out like a reflex, an echo of her father's lessons. But now, standing under those piercing stares, there was no taking them back. PO2. Alvarez gave a dry, mocking laugh, the sound laced with exhaustion. But it didn't hide his unease. His stray shots had already shaken his credibility, and now a civilian had called him out in front of his team. He looked away, as if hoping the moment would pass. But Lieutenant Jack Hanley didn't let it pass. The young commander with the 03 rank stepped forward, his face cold but composed. He signaled the range safety officer to conduct a safety check. The Mark 13 Mod 7's chamber was opened, barrel pointed down, magazine removed. Only after the RSO nodded did Hanley carefully place the rifle on the shooting bench in front of Sarah. No shouting, no reprimand, just a simple gesture, heavier than any order. Prove what you just said. Sarah stepped forward, her boots tapping lightly on the concrete, the sound ringing in her ears like a drum. She bent down, her hand brushing the MAC 13. The rifle was cold, its stock heavy, the metal's texture smooth under her palm. It was different from her father's old wooden hunting rifle, but it carried the same solemnity. She checked the loopholed Mark V HD optic, twisting the magnification dial, feeling each precise click. Then she took a deep breath, letting it fill her chest, seeking calm. Before her, the small square steel target at 500 yards gleamed white against the dusty hill, a mere speck in the haze. Lying prone, Sarah positioned her elbows evenly on the shooting mat. She recalled her father's words. Foundation first, everything else follows. Her body pressed into the ground, weight balanced, legs spread for stability. The stock nestled firmly into her shoulder pocket, not too tight, not too loose. Her finger rested on the trigger, touching but not squeezing. The sea breeze brushed past, tugging at stray hairs under her helmet. She let her mind listen. No laughter, no whispers, just her heartbeat and breath. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them. Through the scope, the world narrowed to a perfect diagonal. The crosshair's center and the distant white target. She inhaled, exhaled, then paused at the natural break. Her upper body stayed still, her pulse slowing. Her finger gently squeezed, steady, as if trying to surprise herself. The shot cracked. The rifle recoiled, but her sight picture held steady. A small puff of dust rose just behind the steel target, signaling a dead center hit. Sarah didn't pause. She cycled the bolt, smooth and unhurried. Second shot. Another clean metallic ping. Then the third, steady, unwavering. Each round flew like a statement. When she lifted her head, silence still gripped the range. But it was no longer the silence of scorn or doubt. It was a heavy silence of acknowledgement. Hanley peered through the spotting scope, his shoulders taut as steel. Then he stood straight, delivering a curt report. 3 shots, all grouped within 1.2 MOA. Dead center. Sarah sat up, her heart still racing, her hands now trembling slightly. She didn't look at Alvarez or seek the others' gazes. She only looked at the MAC 13, and for a fleeting moment, saw her father's silent nod in her memory. One challenge overcome, but Sarah knew this was just the beginning. Because once you step out of the shadows, the door doesn't close easily. And the real question was she ready to face what lay ahead? And before we dive back into the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Oh, And drop a comment below to let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear it. The echo of Sarah's shots reverberated off the cliffs, fading into the distant waves. Range 117 amperes fell into a hush. No applause, no cheers, just the distinct silence of professional soldiers, a silence as weighty as acknowledgement. Lieutenant Hanley lowered the spotting scope, the image of 3 tight holes clustered on the 500-yard steel still vivid in his eyes. The group wasn't just on target, it was so tight that even veteran shooters might spend a day to replicate it. He didn't say much, just a slight nod, as if that was enough. Sarah lingered prone on the mat for a beat, feeling her heart race and settle. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from the adrenaline ebbing fast. She carefully set the MAC-13 down, removed the magazine, and opened the chamber for the RSO to confirm safety. Her movements were meticulous, standard operating procedure, like a trained soldier's. A few SEALs' gazes shifted. Skepticism gave way to curiosity. Chief Marcus Webb, the team's oldest with salt and pepper hair, squinted at Sarah as if searching his memory. He recognized the prone stance, the shooting rhythm, the discipline in every motion. A familiar style. Sarah pushed herself up, breathing evenly, then turned to Alvarez. No smile, no taunt, just a calm explanation, like teaching a beginner. She lifted the rifle, mimicking Alvarez's earlier stance. Left elbow too low, body off-center. She adjusted, redistributing weight to 3 points. Shoulder, elbow, feet. An unstable foundation means an unstable shot, she said softly, her voice even, without a hint of boasting. Then she gripped the stock with her right hand, not too tight. Hold it like you're holding a bird, she continued. Firm enough to keep it from flying, light enough not to crush its wings. The simple but sharp metaphor made a few SEALs nod unconsciously. Her finger rested on the trigger. No jerk, no slap, just a slow, steady squeeze until even the shooter was surprised by the firing. If you know exactly when the shot will break, you're pulling wrong. Hanley stood behind, arms crossed, his sharp eyes silently observing. He saw Sarah recreate each error, then correct each detail. This wasn't a lucky performance. It was deep understanding. Alvarez, who'd thrown the rifle down in frustration, now stood with arms crossed, face flushed. He wanted to argue, but the torn-up targets of his shots versus Sarah's tight 3-round group were undeniable proof. Chief Webb let out a low chuckle, a whistle escaping his lips. Then he muttered, just loud enough for the team to hear, Gunny Martinez. That's his signature. The name was another shot fired. Eyes snapped to Sarah. Some made the connection. Gunnery Sergeant Miguel Martinez, former Marine Sniper School instructor, had trained countless special operators before his injury and discharge. A name not unfamiliar to those who'd learned to shoot at Pendleton. The mood shifted instantly. Alvarez's smirk faded. A few SEALs who'd been indifferent now paid closer attention, their gazes serious but tinged with respect. Sarah sat still, head slightly bowed, unaccustomed to the sudden spotlight. Hanley finally spoke. No shouting, no laughter, just a clipped textbook. Then he nodded to the RSO, signaling to clear the line. Training resumed, but the way the team looked at Sarah had changed. She felt the boundary shift. Before, she was just a target changer, a moving shadow no one noticed. Now, with 3 shots, she'd stepped into a space meant only for those in uniform. Sarah knew this wasn't just about a clean shot. She'd planted a seed in the eyes of SEAL Team 7, and that seed would grow, forcing her to answer a question growing clearer. Was she just an outsider, or one of them? Late afternoon, California sunlight slanted over the low hills behind range 117 amperes, casting a deep gold over scattered dry brush. SEAL Team 7 pressed on with their shooting drills, their rhythm tight, commands booming through the speakers. Sarah sat back, a small notebook open on her lap, pencil marking observations. One shooter's elbow angle too high, another's target transitions too rushed. She logged it all. A habit formed over months of watching. The crunch of tires on gravel drew attention. A black SUV with tinted windows rolled to a stop in front of the range's small office. The door opened, and out stepped a man in a crisp navy uniform, no introductions needed. His presence alone tightened the air on the range. Commander Harrison, Training Area Commanding Officer. A figure even veteran special operators saluted with straightened backs. He strode forward, each step deliberate, his eyes scanning the line of rifles. His mere presence made every movement on the range sharper, more disciplined. Sarah felt her spine straighten instinctively, her heart beating faster. The notebook in her hand suddenly felt twice as heavy. Hanley stepped forward to greet him. No unnecessary formalities, just a quick nod. Harrison stopped by the shooting bench, his steel-gray eyes falling on the neatly placed Mark 13. Then he noticed Sarah, sitting behind in her orange civilian vest. A brief frown flickered across his face. He didn't ask questions, just observed. Hanley reported briskly, voice steady as a seasoned officer. Alvarez struggled with the drill. Martinez, her last name, emphasized, pointed out the error and proved it with a 3-shot 500-yard dead center group. The name made Harrison pause. Martinez. His eyes locked on Sarah, sizing her up from head to toe. For a moment she felt weighed by his gaze, as if explanations were pointless. Gunny Miguel Martinez, he said softly, not a question but a confirmation. Taught here before his discharge. Sarah nodded, her throat dry. Another heavy silence passed. Not threatening but weighty. Harrison bent to peer through the spotting scope, checking the shot group on the target. Then he stood, turning to Hanley. Give her a red visitor's badge. From now on, Martinez observes during advanced sessions. His words hit like a gunshot. Sarah froze. Her ears rang, hardly believing the range commander had just authorized her to officially participate. The red badge, coveted by many, rarely granted, now hers, a nursing student working to pay tuition. Webb raised an eyebrow, a brief smile tugging at his lips. Alvarez lowered his head, silent, no objections left. The team resumed shooting, but from that moment, Sarah's place had shifted. She sat still, clutching her notebook. The sea breeze blew, the waves crashed, but the world around her had changed. For 8 months, she'd been a shadow, invisible. Now, with 3 shots, and the name Martinez, she'd crossed an invisible line. 2 conflicting emotions surged within her. Pride, knowing her father's discipline and lessons weren't in vain. And fear, because the open door came with new responsibilities. Being noticed was one thing. Proving it consistently was another battle. When Harrison left, leaving his brief order behind, Sarah stayed seated, her finger tracing the notebook's blank page. She wrote one line, "From now on, no turning back." Because in that moment, she understood this wasn't a fleeting stroke of luck. It was a summons, a one-way ticket. And the question growing in her mind, did she have the strength to follow the path her father had left unfinished? Alright, dear audience, if you're enjoying this story, drop a 1 or a comment. I'm still here to keep listening. The next morning, Sarah wore the red badge for the first time. The small plastic card clipped to her belt felt heavier than anything she'd ever carried. They called it simply the red badge. But at Camp Pendleton, it was a rare symbol of permission. With it, she was no longer just a target changer. She could stand behind the firing line during advanced training, observe, take notes, and only when asked offer input. SEAL Team 7 was diving into a grueling multi-day exercise, simulating scenarios impossible outside the range. Long-range shots at 700-800 yards on head-sized steel targets, rapid transitions from prone to sitting back to prone, working with a spotter to read wind and mirage. These techniques demanded perfect synergy between shooter and observer. Sarah stood behind the line, white notebook in hand, pencil moving swiftly. She noted every detail, a seal tensing his shoulder too much, causing a slight wobble in the sight picture, another holding his breath too long, his heartbeat shaking the scope. She categorized each observation like variables. No one told her to write, and no one asked to see. But Hanley occasionally glanced over, noticing the dense pages and Sarah's relentless attention to detail. He didn't speak, but his look told her he was watching. Alvarez, humiliated the day before, stayed silent all session. He didn't look at Sarah or start a conversation, but she noticed him stealing glances at her notebook, curious about what she'd written. On the third day, the silence broke. Alvarez was prone, shooting at 600 yards, his shots scattering again. He looked up, frowning, then spoke without turning. "Something wrong with my stance?" Sarah froze. The question wasn't light. It was a tacit admission that she had something worth hearing. She stepped forward, eyes scanning quickly. His elbow was pressed too tight, his left hand gripping the foregrip like a melee weapon. "Not a precision tool. You're fighting the rifle," she said softly, her voice steady, devoid of emotion. "Relax. Let it do its job." Alvarez didn't reply. He adjusted, loosening his grip, dropping his shoulder. One shot. The steel rang cleanly. The spotter called out, "Center hit." Alvarez looked up, glanced briefly at her, and gave a curt nod. No thanks, no acknowledgement. But in this world, silence was recognition. Sarah smiled inwardly but kept her face neutral. She jotted a note. Relax, grip, immediate correction. In the days that followed, it happened again. Another shooter would quietly ask, or Hanley would signal her to observe someone specific. Sarah never spoke out of turn, but when given a chance, her comments were often precise enough to make an immediate difference. Slowly, she was no longer the target girl. A new respect formed in silence. Not celebration, but the way they let her stand closer, no longer pushing her to the sidelines. The way they pulled up an extra chair by the shooting bench instead of leaving her standing at the edge. Chief Webb, seasoned and calm, occasionally leaned over to whisper, "Gunny trained you well." Sarah only replied with a faint smile. Because she knew her father never called it training, he saw it as expectation. One afternoon, a strong wind swept across, mirage distorting the targets. The team struggled to keep their groups tight. Sarah stood behind, peering through the spotting scope. She said nothing, but her mind calculated. Wind speed, mill adjustments. When Hanley asked the spotter for an estimate, the number matched Sarah's almost exactly. Hanley turned, a hint of a smile in his eyes. No words needed, she knew. He saw her ability went beyond an ordinary observer. The session ended as the sun dipped behind the hills. The SEALs packed up, checked weapons, collected spent casings. Sarah tucked her notebook away, standing quietly, feeling a subtle shift. No one said she belonged, but the way they let her be present, the quiet nods as they passed, was affirmation enough. That night, back in her small room near Oceanside, Sarah flipped through her dense notes. She realized she wasn't just observing anymore. She was learning, absorbing, stepping into a world she'd only watched from afar. She closed the notebook, leaned back on her bed, staring at the ceiling. A thought sparked. If they kept listening, one day she'd have to answer. Was she learning to understand, or to become one of them? The morning on range 117 amperes began with a chill seeping from the ocean, creeping through the sandy valley. Fog clung to scopes and wet steel barrels. The air felt different from prior days. Heavy, deliberate, no banter, no ease. Today was Cold Bore Day. The test was the true measure of a shooter. One shot from a cold barrel. No chance to correct. No warm-up rounds to settle in. A single bullet decided if you could maintain precision in real-world conditions. In combat, second chances were rare. Sarah stood back, her red badge glinting in the early Sunday. She held her notebook, flipping to a fresh page. Her heart beat faster than usual, as if she were the one pulling the trigger. Not because anyone asked, but because the test's tension infected everyone present. The target was a head-sized steel plate at 700 yards, painted stark white against the pale yellow earth. A small dot through a scope, but heavy with stakes. Sarah recalled her father's words. A cold-bore shot reveals the truth. It doesn't just show how you shoot, it shows how you prepare. The first shooter, a veteran SEAL, took position. His movements were swift, programmed. The spotter called wind corrections. The shot cracked, metal ringing in the distance. Dead center. No applause, just a slight nod. But the silence carried respect. The next shooter prepared. Slow breaths, stock tight to shoulder. Another crack. The bullet grazed the target's edge. Still a hit, but the group was off. The spotter's face tightened, noting it. No one spoke, but Sarah saw it. In combat, a shot like that could mean life or death. Then Alvarez's turn. He stepped up, his face stiff, eyes a tangle of focus and strain. Sarah watched every move, seeing his shoulders tense, his breath held deeper than needed. It wasn't a natural stance anymore. It was someone trying too hard to control. He held his breath, pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, but dust kicked up below the target. Miss? No laughter, no jeers. Just a thick, heavy silence, weightier than the ocean's roar. Alvarez stayed prone, eyes fixed on the target, disbelieving. A missed cold-bore shot meant a marked training score, and for a SEAL, a crack in team trust. Sarah felt her chest tighten. She'd predicted the miss before the trigger broke. Rushed breathing, unsynced heartbeat, trigger yanked too fast. She scribbled quickly, overhold breath tension low miss. Her writing trembled slightly, her hand less steady than her expression. Hanley watched the scene, face calm, but eyes sharp. He didn't scold or judge. He just noted it and signaled the next shooter. In that quiet, Sarah realized something. Sometimes failure didn't need punishment. It was heavy enough to crush on its own. The morning passed, each shooter taking their cold-bore shot. Some hit dead center, clean as a blade. Others strayed left or right, some missing wider, leaving dust scars on the sand. Sarah logged it all. She began to see a pattern. Those with natural breathing had steady shots. Those who forced control missed. She recalled mornings with her father in an empty field, forcing her to hold her breath until her pulse faltered. See? The more you try to control, the more your body fights back. Trust your natural pause. Those words echoed in the scene before her. When the test ended, the results hung on a clipboard. Some names marked green, others yellow, a few red. Alvarez stared at his score, lips tight. Sarah glanced briefly, then looked away. She didn't want her gaze to feel like pity. In this world, everyone carried their own results. But she understood something deeper. A cold-bore shot didn't just test skill, it tested mindset. Under pressure, the truth always surfaced. As the team packed up, the sun climbed high, glinting off the steel targets. Sarah closed her notebook, tucking it away, feeling as heavy as the targets themselves. Because she knew if she ever faced this test herself, there'd be no room for hesitation. And a quiet question rose. Could she stay calm when the world waited for one shot? That afternoon, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, range 117 amperes echoed with tires crunching gravel again. A dusty military pickup stopped by the command area. The door opened, and 3 men in civilian clothes stepped out, buttoned shirts tucked in, dark sunglasses. Not soldiers, but their confident strides made a few SEALs take notice. Contractors. They carried a long, heavy black case, its metal latches gleaming. They set it on the bench, popped the locks, revealing an unfamiliar, bulky optical system, far more complex than the standard loopholes. One contractor grinned, a hint of smugness. "Next-gen AI optic," he announced, his tone salesman smooth. Auto measures wind, range, mirage, adjusts on the HUD. Just pull the trigger. The air around the bench grew heavy. A few SEALs exchanged looks, not awe, but wariness. They'd lived too long in a world where instinct and discipline trumped gear. Sarah stood back, watching. Curiosity stirred in her, but so did a deep skepticism. The contractors mounted the optic on an Mk-13. Their movements quick but lacking the reverence soldiers gave their weapons. They set the target, a moving steel plate at 1,000 yards, suspended on cables. "We'll show you what machines can do," one said, tapping the blinking display screen. First shot, the metal rang, the target swaying hard. A dead center hit. The contractor laughed, flashing a victory sign. A few SEAL eyebrows rose, impressed but silent. Second shot. The bullet veered, kicking up dust beside the target. "Miss." The confident grin faltered, then recovered. "Systems not used to coastal winds yet. Needs more data," he said awkwardly. Sarah peered through the spotting scope, seeing the mirage twist in the air, winds shifting unpredictably. She knew the miss wasn't about data, it was because no data could read a shooter's heartbeat or the subtle feel of shifting breezes. Machines calculated, but didn't feel. The mood soured. Commander Harrison was there, standing behind, his cold eyes watching. He said nothing, but his frown spoke volumes. A tech demo was starting to wobble. The contractor didn't quit. He looked up, scanning the group, then locked onto Sarah, the girl in the red vest, clutching her notebook. "If you're not convinced," he said, his tone half challenge, half mockery, "let her try it. See if instinct beats tech." The air froze. A few SEALs glanced at each other, lips twitching in surprise. Alvarez raised an eyebrow, disbelieving. Webb stayed silent, but his eyes gleamed with caution. Sarah stiffened, blood rushing to her face. Her heart pounded, echoing in her ear protection. She hadn't volunteered, but now she was center stage. Once again, under the team's and commander's eyes, she had to choose. Harrison glanced at Hanley. No words, but the look asked, "Can she handle it?" Hanley didn't break eye contact with Sarah. She stood still, gripping her notebook, then gave a slow nod. A quiet agreement, heavy as the sky. The contractor smirked, setting the Mark 13 on the bench. AI optic still attached. "Just let the system do its job," he said, a hint of triumph in his voice. But Sarah knew this wasn't just about tech. It was a clash between human discipline and automated precision. She stepped up, her palm touching cold steel. The world faded, leaving only the wind sweeping the range and the swaying target in the distance. Once again she realized her father's lessons were timeless. Machines could calculate, but only humans could hear the wind. And in that moment Sarah knew. The next shot wouldn't just decide the team's trust, it would shape the path she was stepping into. All right, dear audience, if you're gripped by this story, drop a 1 or comment. I'm still here to keep listening. The air on range 117 amperes thickened like salt-laden fog from the sea. Everyone waited for Sarah's shot, with the AI optic mounted on the Mach 13. She knelt, checking the rifle, her hand sliding along the synthetic stock, feeling the cold metal. Her heart beat hard but steady, her breathing slow, controlled. Just behind her, the SEALs shifted to make room. Alvarez, moving to reposition, left his finger inside the trigger guard. A small motion, but a faint click of metal sounded. The stock hit the bench. In that instant, Sarah's skin prickled. It was a sound that didn't belong on a range when the chamber hadn't been cleared. Time seemed to stop. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. Safety first. One small mistake can kill a teammate. Never stay silent if you see danger. Sarah spun, her voice sharp and clear, cutting through the air louder than the waves. Weapon down! Finger off the trigger! The command shattered the silence. Alvarez froze, his body rigid. Hanley stepped in, signaling the range safety officer. The RSO rushed over, following protocol. Stock down, chamber opened, bolt pulled back, magazine removed. A gleaming round fell onto the bench, proving Sarah's fear wasn't baseless. No one laughed, no jokes cracked, just a heavy silence. In everyone's eyes, the near miss was clear. A negligent discharge behind the team, with the line not yet cleared. That mistake could have ended the session or a career. Alvarez bowed his head, lips tight, sweat rolling down his temple. He didn't look at anyone. Hanley didn't reprimand. He just glanced at Sarah. His brief nod, wordless, spoke to the team. She, a civilian, a nursing student, had saved the session with one SOP perfect command. Webb stepped closer, his gaze no longer casual. He placed a hand on Alvarez's shoulder, squeezed lightly, then stepped back. Silence taught the lesson. No lecture needed. Sarah sat back, her heart still racing. She didn't seek anyone's eyes or expect praise, but deep down, she knew this was a turning point. On any range, safety was the ultimate law. Whoever upheld it earned trust. The air settled. Harrison, from the back, stepped forward slowly. He didn't look at Sarah or Alvarez, just scanned the team and said softly, "Safety's saved us more than once in combat. Remember that." The words weren't aimed at anyone, but all eyes turned to her. As the team returned to their positions, Sarah opened her notebook, writing a brief line. ND. Averted. Safety voice matters. Her hand trembled slightly, but her writing was firm. The session continued, but Sarah felt the shift. No more dismissive glances, no more skeptical frowns. Instead, the distance closed. Her presence was accepted as part of the training's rhythm. Alvarez, calmer now, glanced at Sarah. His eyes held a mix of shame and unspoken gratitude. No explanation needed, they both understood. In this world, survival sometimes hinged on a split-second call. As dusk fell, the wind shifted, carrying a saltier tang. Sarah stood watching the uniformed figures move in sync, like a machine. She knew she didn't belong in their ranks. But today, her voice had saved them from a deadly error. For the first time, she felt she'd truly contributed. As the sunset glowed, Hanley passed by, not stopping, just murmuring, "Good call." Sarah heard but didn't reply. She closed her notebook, took a deep breath. In her heart, a realization echoed. She was no longer an outsider watching. She was part of the safety system, and they knew it. The afternoon wind on range 117 amperes grew stronger, kicking up thin swirls of dust across the white-painted targets. The E-type silhouette steel plate hung swaying on its cable, exactly 1,000 yards from the firing line, a faint silver streak to the naked eye. Through a scope, it was the sole destination. The MiG-13 lay on the bench, heavy under the fading light. The AI optic remained fixed, its display glowing with numbers. Wind speed, range, mirage shift. The contractor stood nearby, arms crossed, eyes expectant. He believed tech would do it all. Sarah went prone, her body taut in every detail. Her cheek pressed against the stock, elbows dug into the mat, legs spread wide. She adjusted the scope, framing the moving target. Numbers danced before her eyes, but in her mind, calculations weren't digits. They were the sound of the wind, the rhythm of mirage, her own heartbeat. She breathed deeply, listening. The wind shifted in pulses, less steady than the system's display. Mirage twisted in bands, signaling constant shifts. Trusting the machine would mean a miss. She was certain. Her father's words rang, low and firm. "Don't let a machine think for you. Wind isn't read in numbers. It's felt on your skin. Trust your eyes, your breath, your natural pause." Sarah tilted her head, switching off the HUD's auto display, ignoring the data. Just the bare sight picture remained. Her and the distant steel. Wind brushed her left cheek, teasing but urgent. She estimated from countless observation sessions, about 3/4 MOA, a just right 1 mil. Spotter Webb stood behind, silent, letting her decide. Sarah inhaled, exhaled, pausing at the natural break. The world shrank to a perfect diagonal, crosshair and target. Her finger rested on the trigger, squeezing slowly, steadily, as if to surprise herself. The shot cracked, the rifle kicked. Through the scope, she saw the target jolt, metal ringing low and clear. Hit. Dead center. Time froze. Wind blew. Mirage shimmered. But everyone stood silent. Sarah didn't stop. She cycled the bolt, repeated the breath, adjusted slightly. Second shot, then third. 3 times, the steel sang, each round landing in the center. No deviation, no luck, just discipline and instinct. When she lifted her head, sweat beaded on her temple, her hand trembling faintly from adrenaline. Her eyes met Hanley's. He didn't smile, but a quiet spark flickered in his gaze. Webb, behind, gave a slight nod, lips pressed as if holding back a smile. The contractor was silent. His AI screen still glowed, numbers meaningless as the steel target declared a simple truth. A disciplined human could outshine what machines calculated. Commander Harrison stepped forward, slow and deliberate, his eyes moving from the Mark 13 to Sarah. He didn't speak much, just looked deeply, as if confirming something long known. Sarah sat up, her heart still racing but her breathing steadying. She knew she'd crossed a new threshold. This wasn't an internal test anymore. This moment redefined how the team saw her. Not a civilian, not just a legend's daughter, but Sarah Martinez, with real ability. The sea breeze swept through, carrying salt and gunpowder. On the target, gleaming dents clustered in the center, like a steel signature. Sarah touched the rifle's stock, a certainty rising. The path ahead was open, and there was no going back. After the 1,000-yard shots, the range fell still, as if the ocean itself held its breath. The steel target swayed lightly in the wind, 3 gleaming dents at its heart, undeniable proof. Sarah stayed prone a moment longer, ears ringing from the shots, chest rising with heavy breaths. Only when her hand loosened from the stock did she feel the tremble. Hanley signaled the RSO. Standard protocol, weapon cleared, chamber opened, magazine removed. Sarah lifted her head, sat up, wiping sweat from her cheek. For a brief moment, her eyes rested on the target, memorizing the scene like an etching in her mind. Footsteps approached, heavy and deliberate. Commander Harrison stood there, commanding in the dusk. He didn't smile or frown, just observed, as if weighing not the shots but the person before him. The session ended in solemn silence. When the command "ranges cold" rang out, the SEALs began packing, stowing rifles, collecting scattered casings. The sun burned red, mountain shadows stretching over the sand. No one spoke loudly. They knew they'd witnessed something unforgettable, and their silence was acknowledgement. In the small meeting room near the main office, the after-action review began. No whiteboards, no slides, just a clipboard, pens, and Hanley's steady voice. He listed details: wind conditions, mirage shifts, AI optic performance, each shooter's results. Everything was logged neatly for the training record. Sarah sat at the table's edge, red badge in hand, staying quiet. She didn't belong in their ranks, but she was no longer on the sidelines. Her name came up when Hanley reported, "Civilian observer Martinez executed a 1,000-yard series, 3 center hits, no AI data used." A brief line, but it stilled the room for a beat. Harrison took notes, then looked up, his gray eyes fixed on Sarah, probing. He didn't say, "Good job," didn't praise. He only left a low comment. "We'll discuss this case further." His tone was cold but not dismissive. After the AAR, as the team dispersed to the yard, Sarah stood by the window, watching the sunset paint the coast red. Two conflicting emotions churned within her. Quiet pride. She'd done what Tech couldn't. And unease. Harrison's attention was both an honor and a burden. In the military, being noticed meant more tests. Webb passed by, pausing beside her. He didn't speak much, just gave a slight nod. To Sarah, that small gesture from a chief who'd survived countless missions meant more than 1,000 words. Alvarez kept his distance, but Sarah saw his gaze had changed. No more scorn, no defiance, just a hard-won acceptance laced with respect. In silence, she knew yesterday's lesson had left its mark on him. As darkness fell, Sarah left the room, stepping into the empty yard. The sea roared, wind slapping her face, carrying salt and the faint burn of gunpowder. She sat on a wooden bench, peeling off her gloves, looking at her calloused hands on her knees. Hands that once only set targets and cleaned. Now, they'd signed a steel signature at 1,000 yards, before the military's toughest critics. A question echoed in her mind. What did she really want? Nursing was a safe, planned, practical path. But deep in her chest, another flame had sparked, impossible to extinguish. Footsteps sounded. Hanley appeared, no clipboard, hands in pockets, stride relaxed. He stopped by the bench, his gaze serious but softer than usual. Tomorrow, a formal report goes up, he said. Your name's in it. Harrison wants to know more. Don't be surprised if he calls you directly. Sarah swallowed, nodding. No extra words, no praise, no promises, but enough to know. Everything had changed. As Hanley walked off, Sarah sat in the thickening dark. She looked up at the stars beginning to shine. A new path was opening, uncertain, unforgiving. But in her heart, she felt certainty. Once she'd looked through a scope, she could never go back to being an outsider. Night fell fast on Camp Pendleton. The wind blew harder, rustling dry grass along the fences, carrying salt and lingering gunpowder. Sarah sat alone at the range's edge, her red vest folded beside her, notebook open but blank. The long day felt like a too real dream. The 1,000-yard shots, the respectful silence, Harrison's probing gaze. Now, with the sound of vehicles fading and the SEALs retreating to barracks, she finally had space to breathe. Soft footsteps crunched on gravel. Chief Webb appeared, tall and lean, broad-shouldered, his salt and pepper hair catching the yellow lamplight. He stopped before Sarah, saying nothing at first. From his chest pocket he pulled a small item, a dark gray patch, hand-stitched, a trident gleaming in silver thread. Not an official Navy issue, but the kind SEALs sometimes traded, a silent symbol of respect. Webb placed it in Sarah's palm. He didn't lecture, just spoke briefly, his voice rough as sand. Not for a uniform, for your range bag, because you showed up when it counted today. Sarah stared at the patch, her heart tightening. It was small but weighty, not for its material, but its meaning. Coming from a veteran chief, it meant she was seen as one of them, at least in spirit. She swallowed hard, looking up, but Webb had already turned, heading toward the command tent's light. He left her with the small but monumental token. Moments later, another figure approached. Harrison. The commander stopped before the bench, his gray eyes studying Sarah as before. He didn't glance at the patch in her hand, but clearly knew it was there. He stood still for a beat, then spoke in a low, even tone. Ever thought about going further? Sarah stayed silent. The wind picked up, tugging hair across her cheek. Harrison continued, Nursing's a noble profession. But what you showed today, that's rare. We have programs. Civilian marksmanship, range safety officer, contract instructor. If you want, I can open the door. His words landed heavy as stone. Sarah looked down at her calloused hands, hands that had pulled the trigger 3 times under crushing pressure and held steady. A chaotic rush of emotions stirred. Part of her wanted to shout yes, part wanted to flee from the demanding gaze. Harrison didn't press. He just nodded slightly, then turned, his figure fading into the lamplight. Before disappearing, he left one last line. Think hard, because once you step through, there's no going back. Sarah sat still, the wind lashing her skin, the patch heavy in her palm. Night had thickened, only the distant crash of waves on rocks remaining. She took a deep breath, memories flooding, early mornings with her father in the grass, a hunting rifle on sandbags, his hoarse voice, patience, precision, control under pressure. Back then, she thought it was just a father-daughter game. Now, she understood. It was a legacy. She stood, clutching the patch, then fastened it to the strap of her range bag beside the bench. A small gesture, but in her heart, it was a drumbeat oath. The range was now just starlight and shadow. Sarah shouldered her bag, walking along the gravel path to the parking lot. Each step rang clear in the night. In her heart, she knew she'd left behind the role of target girl. She'd become part of a bigger story, a story of precision, responsibility, her father's legacy, and the path she'd have to choose. But in her heart, another question grew quietly. If she truly entered this world, would she remain an observer, or one day stand equal, holding a rifle not to prove, but to fight? In the darkness, that question followed her off range 117 amperes, opening a door to an unknown future. Night settled over Camp Pendleton, and Sarah left the range with the gray patch swaying on her bag strap. A small thing, but proof of a journey from target girl to someone who faced a challenge even cutting-edge tech couldn't surpass. She no longer hid in her father's shadow or shied from the elite soldiers' gazes. She'd stepped forward, and this time, there was no going back. Sarah's story isn't just about bullseyes. It's a reminder. Sometimes, all it takes is one moment to speak up, to trust yourself, to change how the world sees you. Because precision doesn't come from machines, it comes from discipline, instinct, and a heart that takes responsibility. But Sarah's journey is just beginning. A patch doesn't make her a SEAL. A single series doesn't define a path. The question remains, will she stay an observer or go further into the world her father lived in and nearly died for? And now, I want to ask you, if you were Sarah, would you step forward or choose the safe path? Drop your thoughts in the comments, share this story if it hit your heart, and hit follow to catch part 2 of Sarah Martinez's journey.